This is going to cover the nervous system lab, the brain specifically. So there's going to be an individual video for each one. So we're going to talk about the brain and its structures in this video. Let's go ahead and go to the brain model. These are the structures that you're going to need to know on the brain model. So before we get started, there are a few major landmarks that you need to know before we even jump in and get started. You need to be able to tell the front from the back. The easiest way to do that when you're looking at a brain, because you could be looking at either the right side or the left side, the easiest way to do that is to look for this structure right here. This is the cerebellum, and it is going to let you know that's the back of the brain. So therefore, you can figure out the front of the brain. It's on the opposite side. Now, another structure that you're going to need to know is just basically the cerebrum. So all these wrinkles and folds is called the cerebrum. It's kind of what you think of when somebody says the word brain to you, and it's that mental image that you get of the brain, all the wrinkles and folds. That's the cerebrum. Another structure that you're going to need to know just generally is the brainstem. This entire structure right here, it's all kind of a whitish color. This is all brainstem. We'll talk more about the brainstem later. So we're going to be on, as you go into your labeling handouts, it's not necessarily page 1, but go to the next page. We're going to take a look at the interior structures of the brain. So letter A right here, looking at the labeling handout, this is the cerebrum. So notice I've got it all outlined in pink. That entire structure is cerebrum. It is the largest part of the brain. Now, what you're seeing is the outer area. This is called the cerebral cortex. It's made up of gray matter. And if you remember gray matter, it is the it is the dendrite and the cell body of the neuron. So that's what the outside of the brain is. It's the cell bodies and the dendrites. Now, if you were to cut into this, you would then see the inner area, which is known as the cerebral medulla. And that's going to be the white matter. That's going to be the myelinated axons. So here you can kind of see what I'm talking about. We've got a frontal cut that's been made. You can see this entire outside area right here. This is all cerebral cortex made up of cell bodies and dendrites. So if we have like all of our dendrites here of our neuron, and then the white matter is the cerebral medulla, where we have our myelinated axon and the axon terminals. And that's what the cerebral medulla is going to look like. I do want to point out, because we're going to be talking about those here in a second, is this area right here. You have got ventricles or cavities that can be found within the brain. These cavities are called ventricles, and they're filled with cerebral spinal fluid. You can see the whole ventricular system right here, all of this in blue. That's all ventricles, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. This area here that's highlighted in blue, this is the corpus callosum. Now on the brain model, it's going to be white. On the sheep brain, it's going to be a whitish color because it's made of myelinated axons that connect the right and left hemispheres. This area right here, letter C, this whole entire circular area, it kind of looks like maybe an eyeball with a little dot in the center. This whole structure is the thalamus. For the lab test, you won't need to know that it's part of the diencephalon, but I want to go ahead and introduce that term to you because we are going to need to know it for lecture. So the diencephalon is basically a group of structures in the brain that consists of, well, anything that ends in the word thalamus, for lack of a better way of explaining that right now. So this is the thalamus right here. Now these ridges, these elevated folds right here, all of these little elevated areas of the cerebrum, this is called gyri, plural. Plural is gyri, singular is gyrus. On the test, it doesn't matter to me if you do singular or plural. Now, these valleys, these sunken valleys or these wrinkles, these are called sulci, plural, or sulcus, singular. So the question on the test, previous slide, will be name the elevated folds or ridges. And then on this particular question, it would say name the valley or name the wrinkle. And then that's how you would know what answer to put down. This area right here highlighted in blue, it's really hard for the brain because these structures don't have, they're just kind of an amorphous kind of shape. They don't really have a specific shape. So it's really hard to help me, for me to help you identify where specifically it is. So that's why I've kind of highlighted these areas here. This area here is called the hypothalamus. Remember this structure, let me get my highlighter going so we can see. This structure right here, remember, was the thalamus, that round structure with a little dot in the middle. That was the thalamus. So hypo means below. So this is kind of in front of and below the thalamus. It's kind of a triangular shaped structure, kind of. Now, this structure that is connected to the hypothalamus by this stalk right here, this little stalk, that's that infundibulum. You don't have to know that. But the structure that hangs at the end of that stalk is the pituitary gland. Now, it's really not part of the brain. It is communicating with the hypothalamus part of the brain. The pituitary gland is actually part of your endocrine system. Okay, this passageway here, which is going to take cerebral spinal fluid from up in this area, and it's going to go down. So that flow of cerebral spinal fluid is going to go down. This passageway that's moving cerebral spinal fluid from one spot to another spot is called the aqueduct of Sylvis or the cerebral aqueduct. Either one is fine with me. I don't care which one you call it. Okay, letter I. This is part of your brain stem. So the best way to kind of help me help you see where this is, I can get that out right. This is the pons. This area right here is part of the pons. Notice it's bulgy right here. Okay, it bulges. So if you can identify the pons, then you can identify the part of the brain stem above the pons and the part of the brain stem below the pons. So it's kind of like pons is kind of your landmark of the brain stem. Now, this little triangular indentation here into the cerebellum, we haven't named that yet, but this little indented area kind of looks like a triangle. This is called the fourth ventricle. If you look, your cerebral aqueduct is bringing cerebral spinal fluid down that passageway, and it's emptying into this fourth ventricle. Keep in mind, ventricles are cavities within the brain where cerebral spinal fluid not only is housed, but it's also made there. So the fourth ventricle will house cerebral spinal fluid. It also has the ability to make it. Now, this area right here, remember I said your pons is your landmark. So here is your pons right here. Below the pons, this part of the brain stem is the medulla oblongata. Now, you need to kind of picture this imaginary line right here that is, so the cerebellum is this brown thing right here. And it just is kind of sits on the bottom of the brain of the skull bones. So everything above that dotted line is going to be inside the skull. Everything below that dotted line is going to go through your vertebral foramen of your vertebra. So you can imagine that little dotted line is your foramen magnum, right? At the hole in the occipital lobe where the spinal cord passes through. Okay. So this area here that's shaded, notice it's above the foramen magnum, below the pons. This is the medulla oblongata. This area here, if you have your imaginary line again and picture where that foramen magnum is, it's just right here. That is going to be your spinal cord. That's what's going to pass through the vertebral foramen of the vertebra. Okay, letter M. Now, the question on the test, notice I've got the entire structure outlined. So the question on the test is going to be name the entire structure. This is the cerebellum, okay? Now, if I were to say name the white stuff or the white matter on the inside, if you kind of look at it sideways, it kind of looks like a tree. So this is called the arbor vitae or tree of life. I don't mind, whichever one you want to put down is fine with me. Letter O. Again, remember, this is part of your brain stem, so your pons is your landmark there. And if we're above the pons, then that's called the midbrain. The midbrain. Again, kind of doesn't have much of a shape there to it. Letter P is going to be the pineal gland, which is part of a larger structure known as the epithalamus, which is part of a group of structures known as the diencephalon. So again, here's your thalamus right here. Remember, your hypothalamus was in front of and below. All of these are structures of the diencephalon. Now, the epithalamus, or the pineal gland, is back here between the cerebellum and the thalamus. So it's more towards the back. The pineal gland and the epithalamus are really, there's only one structure difference. It's called the habenula. You don't have to know that for lab. So pineal gland is what I'm labeling here. This is actually something that's going to secrete a substance known as melatonin. And that's what's going to help you feel sleepy whenever the lights are out. I did put on here just a sagittal view of the brain, a description. I just kind of got this off the internet somewhere. So if you need help just a review of that. Here's a video here for you to take a look at. Okay, and that's all of the brain structures. Well, let's take a look at the exterior view of the brain before we quit. So let's do the next page. Let's take a look at the exterior structures of the brain. So again, you need to know front from back. So you've got your cerebellum right here. So this lets you know this is the back of the brain. Now, there is a line right here that's going to go between the frontal lobe. It's going to separate the frontal lobe. It's called the central sulcus, and the parietal lobe. So this right here, all of this that I've got outlined in black, that's all parietal lobe. And again, the part that differentiates the parietal lobe from the frontal lobe is everything blue, yellow, and kind of orange. That's all parietal lobe. Everything red, brown, and green, that's all frontal lobe, because the dividing line, that central sulcus, is right there. So again, this sulci that's kind of deeper than some of the other ones, it separates your frontal lobe from your parietal lobe. That is your central sulcus. This lobe right here, again, it's forward from the central sulcus. This is the frontal lobe. Now, when you're answering these lobe questions on the test, the question's going to say, name the lobe. Your answer needs to be frontal lobe, parietal lobe. You have to include lobe in your answer. This lobe right here, notice the horizontal flow here to this side of the brain. This is the temporal lobe. And then way back in the back over here by the cerebellum. So again, this would be name the entire structure right here. This lets you know you're at the back of the brain. That's the cerebellum. The lobe back there beside it will be the occipital lobe, occipital lobe. So it's just going to be this area right in through here. That's going to be your occipital lobe. Now, this raised structure, this specific gyrus, I'm not going to ask this on the test. It could pop up as a bonus question or something. But this structure right here, because it comes before the central gyrus, here's the central gyrus right there, central sulcus, I'm sorry. This raised fold is a gyrus, and because it comes before the central sulcus, this red raised elevated fold is called the pre-central gyrus. This is involved in motor control, so allowing you to move. Now, the blue elevated fold behind the central sulcus, here's that central sulcus right here. Now, this elevated fold behind it is the post-central gyrus, and it's involved in somatosensory type. So what it is like if you feel pain or anything like that, that's going to get registered in this gyrus of the skull. Again, I'm not going to ask you that on the test as far as a test question. Could pop up as a bonus question. We're definitely going to be talking about it in the lecture class, so I wanted to show you where that was. Now, looking at the front of the brain, back of the brain, you can see this large depression right here. This is the longitudinal fissure, so it's definitely deeper than a gyrus, okay? Or a sulci, I'm sorry. So this is the longitudinal fissure. It's going to separate the left hemisphere from the right hemisphere. Okay, and that's going to be it for the brain.